This podcast is brought to you by the kind support of the Active Share podcast. What does a two-time world-winning coach and MLB baseball team owner, top chef, and luxury fashion designer have in common? They've all been featured on the Active Share podcast. If you're seeking the less obvious and are curious about the ever-changing world and how it affects investing, the Active Share podcast is for you. Hear thought-provoking conversations with thought leaders, company executives, and William Blair Investment Management's own analysts and portfolio managers as they share unique perspectives on investing in a world that's always evolving. Download the Active Share podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, and TuneIn. Our next guest was captain of our college soccer team. Let's hear how she translates the skills learned there into working with teams, managing expectations, and learning to live with setbacks in the investment arena. I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Molly Burba, who is Managing Director in Investment Research at Riskbridge Advisors, an OCIO firm serving institutional and individual investors. She previously held a series of investment research and allocation roles. She has a passion for wellness and spent a period working as a wellness consultant in a firm she established, and was captain of the women's soccer team while at Vanderbilt University. Welcome, Molly. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's start right at the beginning. Where did you grow up? What did you study? And how did you come to enter the world of investing?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Ohio, in the Midwest, and I went on to Vanderbilt University where I studied economics. I didn't at all grow up around investing, but I did grow up in a family business. And so while I didn't come to investing from a stock selection or a trading mindset, I was always very interested in the way companies operate. I actually initially thought I might go on to law school and be a corporate lawyer. But when I started thinking at Vanderbilt about a career path, I was drawn to those aspects of investment banking in that getting to know different types of companies and understanding how they work. But I candidly knew very little, if anything, about Wall Street. So that was a very steep learning curve once I got into the profession.
But it seems like competition entered your life quite a bit earlier. What age were you when you started playing soccer? And how did you think about that being like something you pursued at college?
Sure. I started playing probably around 5 years old. I have an older brother. He's 5 years older, and he was very athletic. My parents are both athletic and were athletes. And so being active was something that came very naturally to me. I used to play one-on-one football with my brother in the backyard, and he would play on his knees. So he was my first competitor. And if I didn't want to play because it was getting too rough, he would call me a quitter. But then when the neighborhood kids would come over, he would make sure that they were, very gentle with me. So he's always been a great protector and cheerleader for me. I started playing, I played all sorts of different sports, to be honest, growing up. I also, in addition to playing soccer, I ran track in high school as well. It was a natural affinity where I started playing for a rec team, and then I was on a travel team, and then I tried out for the Olympic development program and played for the state of Ohio in that way. And I was just very lucky that I had a club soccer environment where I had a great group of teammates and coaches, and so was able to develop all the aspects of my game to that level, really. And that's actually the reason I went to Vanderbilt. I was there. I went to Vanderbilt on a soccer scholarship. So it's being athletic and being active is something that has always been, a top priority in my life, regardless of where I've been in the different stages of my life.
I always think that sports at a high level are quite a good training ground for life skills. And maybe can you talk about what you learned both from being a teammate at such a high level and being a captain? What skills that you brought to bear that you've used later in your professional life?
Sure. No, absolutely. I think that it's very much connected. Sports are a fantastic training ground for professional experience. And I think There's a lot of aspects that go into it. You certainly have to sacrifice to excel, to perform. You have to know how to prioritize when you are at the collegiate level and you're trying to excel both academically and with your team. You have to be very organized, right? You have to be really focused in on what you're doing and have that work ethic to make it all happen. I also think what is interesting when you're in sports that you might not appreciate until later in your professional life is that you do have to understand how to work with lots of different types of people. So you'll have coaches and teammates that have different styles. You have to find a way to work with them no matter what. And I think that very much carries over to your professional life, understanding your environment and, what it will take to succeed in different types of environments. I think also sports are certainly humbling and grounding on some level, and that's really important in your professional career. You have to understand that there are, ebbs and flows. You're not always at the peak of your game in athletics or professionally, and you have to understand kind of how to ride through those periods of volatility. And so that certainly has carried through as I've, progressed in my career as well. And I think, one thing I was thinking about as I was talking, I think no more so do you draw on a lot of these skills than as a working mom, to have to be that organized every day and know how to really laser in and focus with your time on what's in front of you at that particular moment. That's certainly something that you learn as you're a collegiate athlete and trying to juggle all of these different things. That helps you, as all working moms know.
So interesting. You certainly are a captain in that format as well. So
yeah.
I'm sure you draw up on that. And also, I always think it's like an executive coach and chief motivator as well as a mom, especially as the kids get older.
Absolutely.
I love that as well, because obviously that analogy of, not being at your peak at all times, obviously there will be periods of injury, recovery, setback, and also not always winning either. Did you find that you learned as much from your losses as from your wins?
Yeah, and I'll candidly share my career trajectory in my sports career in college. I peaked early, so I was recruited, and very early on, I started as a freshman, which is a little unconventional. I had a lot of success early in my career, and when for the team dynamic changed and there were changes made in terms of where people were playing. And ultimately what that meant was that by the time I got to my senior year, I was in a different sort of role. So I was no longer a starter, but I was captain. And so I had to learn how to put all of that, my competitive, although I was certainly always wanting to be on the field, I also had to learn how to manage a new role in a leadership capacity. So it was a very interesting dynamic in that I wasn't at the peak of my athletic performance at that period, even though I was the leader or a co-leader. There were co-captains. So it was an interesting dynamic, and something that probably was my greatest lesson of my entire athletic career, frankly, was learning how to continue really to put the brave face forward and do my best to encourage everyone around me while I was suffering on a personal level with not being at the peak of my game.
That's really insightful. And moving now from that to your overall passion for wellness,
Sure.
Because that's something that you have focused on. And how well do you think we integrate the importance of physical, mental wellness into our professional lives, and how could we do better?
I certainly think we could do better. I mean, I think that there is much more an awareness now than there ever has been on these various facets of wellness. So, awareness is certainly the first step. So that's encouraging to see. As you alluded to in the beginning, I took a hiatus from my finance career when I was in a period of time where I wasn't able to have all those balls juggling at the same time, professionally and personally, but I wanted to do something during that period. And wellness has always been my personal passion. And so I developed a business around it. I got several different certifications and developed a business where I was advising professionals, corporate law firms, and national investment management firms, advising them on wellness solutions. And I do think that we can do a better job of integrating these wellness practices in our professional life. That's what my business was all about, because of the fact that when you think about the facts, the factors that we need to be successful professionally, whether it's, the mental clarity or stamina or creativity that we all need to excel professionally, we can do a better job of optimizing those through things like nutrition, nutrient density, movement, sleep hygiene, even stress management techniques. Bringing all of these things together will help us be more productive, and also not just more productive and perform better, but also just be happier in our workplace. I mean, there's a lot of research about how that impacts our ability to be effective. So yeah, I certainly think it's something where it's starting to be more in even the popular press about the importance of a lot of these factors. And it's things that will make us better in all facets of our life. And certainly our professional realm is where we spend a lot of time. So I think it's a great way to be more productive in that area.
No, it's certainly true. And I've been thinking about that a lot recently as, I think our lives, some of us didn't have a great deal of balance, but I do think that we naturally strive for a balance. And we probably had reached some form of balance before the pandemic. And that threw a lot off in terms of maybe cutting out the commute to work, which may have involved exercise, or, us all hovering around the kitchen at home and having access to snacks that might not have been there. So I think it involves, unfortunately, a resetting of all of those balances. But despite your hiatus, you did return to the investment world. So what is it that you like about it, and what lured you back?
Yeah, of course. I think first of all, I would say it's a very privileged position to be in. I think most importantly to me, it's just continuous exposure to really fascinating people. You were often in the seat that I sit in, hearing about new technologies or developments in different industries before they are more broadly publicized. And so it's, I consider that just an advantageous position to be able to have access to information and such brilliant people and be speaking with them every day. I also think that it's also a real gift to be stimulated intellectually in whatever professional role you have. I came from a pretty simple Midwestern background, and I've now been able to travel abroad and work with people all over the world, and have been fortunate to learn that the world is very small, and that ability and gift to work with people from all over the globe. But at the end of the day, I would say my role really is a people business, right? You're meeting with people and judging their character, their understanding their mission, and assessing their ability to stay true to that mission, humble when they're in admitting any mistakes, and reassessing how they can adjust. And it's really about ethics and humility and character and all of the things that make us who we are. And so I think it's really, to sum it up, that ability to be stimulated intellectually and the gift of meeting such fascinating people.
And of course, all of this comes together in an OCIO type organization, because you are the outsourced CIO. So you're essentially holistically working with the client in many different ways. Can you talk a little bit about that business today, just in terms of the landscape for OCIOs and how it's evolving?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think just to preface it, there's been extraordinary growth in the OCIO market. It's, according to Chestnut Advisory Group, it's about $2.5 trillion now, and will grow to be $4 trillion by 2026. So not only has there been amazing growth over the last 5 years, it's projected to continue over the next 5 years. And we really think at Riskbridge that there are several factors that contribute to that. And as has been the case in many different facets of our world, the pandemic has accelerated some of these trends. First of all, I would say market volatility is definitely something that drives institutions, particularly endowments and foundations, to focus more on risk management and think about what practices they have in place to handle that. There is increased complexity now to board governance and decision making, and people have faced more challenges in terms of meeting and whether in person or virtually and getting to make decisions in a timely manner. Of course, that's always been that's gotten more difficult during the pandemic. I think there's been a recognition that there is a need for enhanced governance and greater transparency, and that involves a lot of different factors, not only risk and return reporting, but also factor exposure, including now at the top of everyone's mind, ESG factors, of course, reduction of risk overall. And then another thing that we've seen with a lot of these endowments and foundations is, the great resignation, if you will. So you have volunteer board members that are deciding to leave nonprofits or aging out of those roles, and you're left with a bit of a gap on some of those boards, including when it comes to investment skills. And that's really one of the many reasons, but I would say a primary factor in the reason that our founder, Bill Kennedy, decided to launch Riskbridge at the onset was that he recognized that these smaller endowments and foundations, those with, let's say 5 billion or less of AUM, needed more attention on these issues and were underserved or perhaps overlooked by some of the much larger players in the OCIO market.
It's really interesting. And do you see the model evolving that there may just be one OCIO for one institutional investor? Do you see any that might have maybe 2 or 3 OCIOs, maybe one for perhaps passive investments and one for active investments, or does it tend to be just the one size fits all?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it probably depends on the size of the mandate, particularly on the smaller end of the market where we serve. We can help our clients cover the entire gamut of their investment portfolio. But there are certainly aspects where people have some capabilities in-house and want to outsource other parts of their portfolio. And we have mandates like that as well. So it is client by client dependent, certainly, and it depends on what their goals are and what their mandate is.
And if you were to look into a crystal ball in terms of how this industry will continue to evolve, I think you make a really interesting point about both the great resignation and how that affects staffing, as well as just the barriers to entry now, just the large amounts of whether it be governance or risk analytic tools that are required and how much they can cost and how it often doesn't make sense for a small institution to have that on their own. Do you see that the market will continue to grow, and how will the consulting market intersect with that? We've already seen quite a lot of consulting firms move into the OCIO space.
Sure. I mean, I think, our mission and one thing that we try to communicate to our clients is that we have no conflicts of interest, right? So when people are marrying these different business lines, questions can come into play as to where those conflicts arise. And we certainly come at this from a perspective that we have one mission in the way that we serve our clients. That's an aspect that we are trying to serve in an unbiased way, and I think differentiates us from some of the larger players in the market that wear different hats, and if you will, in different parts of their organization.
And I know every client is different and have their own kind of DNA, but if you were to say maybe the issues that are on your mind as you work with clients today, what are some of those key issues? For example, how much does ESG factor in? How much are you looking at inflation or cash flow?
Sure. Well, I would say that one thing that is on the top of everyone's mind, whether it's an endowment and foundation or if it, we also have high net worth clients, more multifamily office aspect of our business. You do see that people are evolving and looking for more mission-based investing in certain circumstances, right? So we have ESG as part of our mandate. I think that people are seeking technology-based investments and wanting to be on the forefront of technology. And I think the other thing that we are certainly keeping in mind as we think about portfolio allocation is we're in a place now where we're coming off a 40-year bull market in bonds and declining bond yields. And our analysis suggests that the next 20 years could be the reverse of that. And so that has a real profound impact on how we think about risk budgeting and asset correlation for both this current generation of our clients and also future generations. I think that, when it comes to the equity markets, we've already seen it in the last month or so. There's increased volatility in those markets. And so looking at underlying ways that, investments managers can capture that dispersion in the market will be important, rather than just expecting that the markets will go up in perpetuity. So all of those things are at the top of our mind now. I mean, I think certainly, as you alluded to with ESG, we incorporate that into our firm policies and practices, as I think most of our competitors and colleagues would as well. We certainly have ESG factors in our investment analysis and also in our decision-making process. And we seek, appropriate disclosures from our underlying managers and entities where we allocate capital. We're trying to understand what their policies are for ESG and make sure that we understand how that's impacting their strategy. And then, of course, we are incorporating ESG into our reporting for clients. So certainly something that's at the top of mind, I think, of everyone in the industry.
Now, that's really good to hear. And obviously, one aspect of ESG is diversity. And you've already spoken a bit about the similarity between your soccer team experience and having to juggle as a working mom. Can you talk a little bit about your observations on the current levels of diversity in our financial services industry? And maybe mention in particular how inclusive it is for working parents, in your view.
Yeah, well, I think that, as is well known, finance is not an industry that historically has been known for diversification. But I do think that there is now an awareness. And I would say that that's probably the first step, right? Recognition being the first step. Investors are demanding diversity and inclusion statistics. It's something that we ask all of our funds that we allocate to. We ask what the makeup of their investment team and their boards are. And it's certainly something that's on everyone's mind. I think that, particularly talking about working mothers, that's something that is near and dear to my heart. I think I would characterize the current time period as a pivotal moment for us, right? Because the demands a leadership role in finance or any other industry for that matter are challenging. It's extremely challenging to juggle these dual worlds. And we have seen women drop out of the workforce because of these challenges. I, for one, myself took a bit of a detour in my career because of an inability, as many women can relate. At one point in my career, I had 3 kids, 5 and under. I was commuting an hour and 25 minutes each way. My husband works in private equity and was traveling constantly, and I couldn't make it all work. And I had to reassess and take a time out and start to rethink how I could align my professional goals with what I needed personally. The flip side of all of this is that we have learned, if there's one silver lining in what has happened in this world in the last couple of years, we have learned that remote work is possible. And you can be productive and focused while having some flexibility built into your schedule. And so I'm hoping that becomes a real opportunity for women like myself who are driven and want to succeed at a certain professional level and previously haven't had the ability to make it all work at the same time. There's certainly been a lot of research about this concept of deep work, right? How much time can you actually devote at a certain period to deep work? And I think that no one probably knows that concept better than working moms. You have this limited resource of time. And so you will be completely laser focused and driven during that window. And I think that there is an untapped pool of women that can excel in this sort of environment. And I'm hoping that women will, in all working parents, it's not just women, all working parents can be better utilized going forward in ways that fit in a more flexible environment.
So interesting. And thank you for being an excellent role model in that respect. I was just wondering what, in your experience, have been some of the perhaps supports that really make a difference to making it work for working moms in particular and parents in general. I'm thinking of things like, is it the better leave at the outset? Is it maybe making childcare on site, if on site working is what required? Is it a more flexible and understanding remote working setup, more vacation time? How do you think that these differences stack up to really kind of to enable some of these balances to be had?
Well, I would say check all, right? I mean, I think all of the above. I've been very lucky throughout my career. So my first pregnancy, I happened to work for a European-based company and I had an extraordinary leave. And so that was an amazing way to start as a working mom. I think that had I not been afforded that initial fantastic leave, I'm not sure I could have even made it work with one child. So that certainly was an amazing privilege. I think that in addition, as many working moms will attest to and working parents, while my kids were really, really little, I was very blessed to have some angels in my life who were, my partner in crime. I mean, I had caregivers that worked with us who really made my life seamless. And so when I was at work, I was fully focused on work, and they were the people who really were the reason I was able to succeed. We had a near and dear woman by the name of Joanna who worked with us for many years and helped raise my babies. And without her, I could have never made it work. So I think it takes a village, as everyone says. And I think that all of these factors are important. And I guess what I was getting to with my last point is I do think that, there is a way to have people not do it all at the same time, but do it all with the advent of knowing that remote work is possible. And so I hope that starts to be incorporated into policies where whether people have more flexibility after they have babies or when their kids are little or whenever throughout their careers that they need it, that it's understood that having a more flexible arrangement doesn't mean that you are flexible in terms of your productivity or work product or effectiveness, really. So yeah, I mean, I think all of these aspects are important. But again, just like my point on the diversity, I think recognition is the first step. And I think that this key period we've had where everyone has worked remotely may be just the steps we need in the right direction to show people that working from home or having flexibility doesn't mean you're slacking off. It just means that you are just that, working remotely. So that would be my hope.
Very well said. As you were speaking, I just thought there should be a special word in the English language for that deep affection we hold for the people who look after our children.
That the truth? Yeah,
I'm sure some language like German has it, but it's something quite unique. So moving there from other people who've supported you throughout your career, were there any key people, perhaps in your career, or even your sports career, that had an influence on you, and in what way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that one thing that was very pivotal for me, particularly as a really young woman in finance, is that I was very lucky to have fantastic female role models at almost every early job I had. So my first job at a regional investment bank out of Vanderbilt, I had a woman by the name of Coco Kyriopoulos, who was a vice president on my team, and I worked directly for her. And she was just a real joy. I mean, she has just an energy and a lightness about her, in addition to being brilliant. And she sort of very early on for me bucked the trend that to be a working woman, you had to be, this kind of like hard nose, type that you would see in a movie, right? She had a wonderful personality, very personable. And so I was really lucky. She was my first role model. I also had in that job, I had a lot of female colleagues my same age as well, other analysts and associates. So that was amazing right off the bat. Then after I went back to business school, got my MBA at Columbia, my first job after Columbia, I was hired by a woman by the name of Christina Seal at Fortis Bank. I worked for her for a few years and again saw that here was a woman who was championing my cause. She encouraged them to promote me early and was really helping me in my career projection. I left Fortis to go to Man Group. Again, I was hired by a woman. And this woman, Michelle McCluskey, was very important in my career because when I was at Man was during the great financial crisis. And so there was a lot of transition, rounds of layoffs, and just turmoil, frankly. And I was hired for one thing. I was hired to start a private equity investment program for this subsidiary of Man Group. And because of the financial crisis, that project was shelved and I had to pivot. And she, I think, really more than anyone in my career, just identified me, for lack of a better word, as an athlete, really, and said, okay, well, this person was effective in this way, but she could be effective in other roles. And she helped me transition throughout my career at Man and into different parts of that organization. And so that was really impactful for me. And then I would say also, I went on to also at Man and in subsequent roles, be very lucky in that I was surrounded by, in a male dominated field, by male bosses and colleagues who were just as supportive. So believe it or not, at Bridge Advisors, I was hired when I was 6 months pregnant by two men. And so that's just a very progressive move, right? They knew I was going to take a maternity leave. They didn't pressure me in terms of the amount of time I took. And that was a very advantageous position to be in. And then as I've transitioned back into my role, hired by our CEO, Bill Kennedy at Riskbridge, he knows that I'm a working mom. I don't have to hide those demands at all on my time because there's just a recognition of the work ethic that I have, the dedication that I have, and there's just a trust, right? And that's what it really all comes down to, is a mutual level of respect and trust among colleagues. And so I've just been in a privileged position where I have had people who have supported me. It's not to say I haven't had setbacks throughout my career. I certainly have. I've had to, my first job out of undergrad, that firm was bought out in my first year. And so that was a very strange position. I came from a family business and then I find myself in a role where there's transition in the very first year. So that was strange. And then as we all had to adjust and pivot after the great financial crisis. So there's been setbacks, but I have had people who have championed me in my work, and those role models and mentors have been key really in me succeeding and also just being, finding the joy in the work, in the everyday work, being professionally fulfilled and happy at work, which I think is, something that maybe isn't stressed enough.
It's so interesting because as you were speaking, it just struck me that we so very rarely have preparation sort of formally for those type of setbacks.
Yeah.
And I was reflecting back to your time in sport. I mean, I'm sure sport is not considered a zero-sum game, but every game there will be a winner and a loser. And I think we tend to go through our education thinking that, well, our careers are winning trajectories. And there's very little preparation for that pivot, that setback, that retooling, that kind of reinvention of oneself. Agility, obviously, you mentioned someone seeing you as an athlete, that agility, that ability to I suppose, to flex is key. But I still think we're not good at training people for that.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, I think pivoting is really the word to me. We have to be able to understand that just like in any aspect of our life, our career, it's not a straight line up, right? We're going to have ebbs and flows and times where things are clicking and times where things aren't, whether it's with the teams we're on or the work we're doing or our compensation packages, all of those things can ebb and flow over time with the idea that, eventually we're 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We're still building every day. So I think it's important for people to keep that in mind who are earlier in their career, certainly. And I think that early setback I had of our firm going through that transition was a great training ground to understand, oh, okay, this is not always going to be a straight uphill battle or straight uphill trajectory, if you will.
And just coming to an end now, I've got just a couple more questions. One is around any key piece of advice that has stayed with you or any creed or motto that you live by.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really simple. I mean, it's just probably the motto would just be to do the work. I think I come from an extremely hardworking family. I saw my parents built a life really where nothing was given to them. They worked very hard. They instilled in my brother and I that work ethic. I think on those same lines, though, my dad was a very, very optimistic person. And I'm not, I am a natural, very optimistic and very extroverted person. And I am myself very naturally an introverted person. So I would probably tell my, my younger self to branch out. That's something he used to say kind of in jest with me, is to branch out. But certainly it's something that I have had to force myself to do over time, to be more open, to be open and flexible, like we talked about, being willing to pivot, and also to have more confidence. I mean, I think that's something that, I've struggled with. And I think that I have found that if you do the work, you're prepared, be confident in that, not overly confident or defensive, but have confidence in the foundation of knowledge that you have.
Well, thank you so much, Molly. It's been a real pleasure to hear from you today, your insights both from the field, on and off the field, and just what that has taught you in terms of your trajectory through your career, which is, thank you for being so open about how the setbacks came and how you pivoted after that. It's been very refreshing to have this conversation. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
I'm Aoife David. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organisations and affiliations of the host or any guest.